The soft, ambient glow of the neon open sign cast a warm, inviting hue over Mason's Diner. It was the kind of place where regulars felt like family, the smell of sizzling burgers and fries lingering in the air, mixed with the chatter of patrons enjoying their meals. The diner's checkered floors were always clean, the red vinyl booths well maintained, and the jukebox in the corner hummed old-school tunes. It was Thursday evening, and Sam Mason, the owner, was behind the counter, wiping down a few stray crumbs. Business had been steady all day. He glanced at the clock above the door, 8:45 p.m. Only 15 minutes until closing. Just the last few patrons left to settle their bills. Sam had worked hard to build this little family-run restaurant, and it was his pride. His father had passed it down to him, and he'd kept it afloat through thick and thin. But lately, he had been struggling with the rise of newer, flashier competitors in the area. The bustling part of town had grown more crowded, and the fast-paced lifestyle seemed to be driving people away from the diner's cozy, nostalgic appeal. Tonight had been no different. A couple of college kids were arguing over something trivial by the window booth, while an elderly couple sat in their regular corner, discussing the weather like it was a matter of life and death. Sam didn't mind the eccentricities, he was used to it. But he was getting tired. His eyes were heavy, and his mind already started shifting toward his evening routine, which usually consisted of a quiet dinner, a few episodes of his favorite crime series, and a good night's sleep. That's when the door opened with a soft jingle. Sam glanced up, expecting it to be one of the regulars who forgot their wallet or a last-minute couple coming in for a late meal. But this couple? They weren't what he expected. The man was in his late 30s, with a sharp jawline that could have been carved from stone. His leather jacket glinted in the dim light, as if it had been chosen specifically to command attention. He wore dark sunglasses, at night. Not your typical diner attire, Sam thought. He moved with an almost arrogant confidence, his every step measured, purposeful. Behind him, a woman stepped in. At first glance, she seemed out of place too. Her beauty wasn't in the typical sense, but there was something striking about her, an otherworldly charm. She wore a simple dress, but it clung to her figure just right, giving her an air of mystery. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, those eyes, seemed to flicker with a secret Sam couldn't place. The couple didn't immediately make a beeline for an empty table. Instead, they stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the room. Their eyes locked on the far corner booth, the one closest to the windows. It was a good seat. In fact, it was the best in the house. But Sam hated when people took that table without even asking. It was reserved for someone who knew the rules of the diner, not just any walk-in. He watched them carefully. Something didn't feel right. It was the way they moved, the way they carried themselves. Everything about them screamed, "We don't belong here," as though they had stepped into another world. They made their way to the booth. Without a word to anyone, the woman slid into one side, and the man followed her. There was no polite greeting, no smile, no acknowledgement of the staff or the other patrons. Just an intense silence, as if they were already in a world of their own. Sam frowned, wiping his hands on his apron. It wasn't like him to judge people based on looks alone, but something about the situation felt off. Maybe it was the sense of entitlement, the sheer confidence in their actions. Or maybe it was the odd air of familiarity, like they had been here before, but in a time Sam couldn't remember. For a moment, he hesitated, debating whether he should say something. But before he could make up his mind, one of the waitresses came over to him, a nervous smile on her face. "Sam, they haven't ordered anything." Sam's eyes darted to the booth. The couple hadn't even glanced at the menu, let alone picked up their drinks. It wasn't like that here. People came in, ordered, ate, and left. This kind of attitude wasn't tolerated at Mason's Diner. He sighed, pushing his sleeves up. He didn't have time to deal with people who thought they could waltz in, take up space, and not follow the rules. He wasn't in the mood for games tonight. "I'll handle it," Sam muttered, walking toward the booth. The man noticed him first. His eyes were cold, calculating. He didn't flinch as Sam approached, only gave a small tilt of his head, as though studying him. Sam stopped just a few feet away from their table. "We're closing soon. You should wrap it up," Sam said, trying to keep his voice calm, though the irritation was beginning to seep through. It wasn't like he didn't understand late arrivals, but this was different. They were disrespecting the place, and Sam wasn't going to let it slide. The woman didn't look at him. She simply continued to sit there, gazing out the window, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table. The man, however, raised an eyebrow. "We're fine here, thanks." His voice was low, almost dismissive. Sam's patience thinned. "You've been here long enough. We need to clean up, and you need to leave." For a brief second, the air in the diner seemed to still. Even the jukebox seemed to go silent, as if holding its breath. The woman finally looked at him, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked onto his, and something about the intensity of her gaze made Sam pause. There was a moment of silence, and then she spoke. "You don't know who we are, do you?" The words cut through the air like a knife. Sam blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" He couldn't help himself. His tone was defensive now, although he had no idea why. But the woman didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. She simply leaned back slightly, her gaze never wavering. And in that moment, Sam knew, this wasn't some random couple. The man sat up straighter, shifting slightly, as if something had clicked in his mind. His hand slowly reached up, and with a deliberate motion, he removed his sunglasses. Sam froze. It wasn't the sunglasses. It wasn't the man's sharp features. It wasn't even the fact that the couple hadn't yet ordered. It was the sudden, gut-wrenching realization that he recognized the man. Or at least, he should have. Before Sam could open his mouth to say anything, the man spoke again. "Maybe now you understand." His voice was calm, too calm. But the edge of something darker lingered beneath it. Sam felt his heartbeat quicken, his mind racing. Who were these people? What did they want here? And why did they have this overwhelming air of power? But it wasn't just the recognition that was unsettling, it was the feeling that Sam couldn't shake. The feeling that he had made a grave mistake. The woman stood up suddenly, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. Sam watched in stunned silence as she reached into her bag, pulling out something that caught the light. It was small but undeniably precious, and the way she held it told Sam everything he needed to know. But it was too late. The truth would shatter everything Sam thought he knew about this evening. Part 2, The Unraveling Truth. Sam stood frozen. His mouth went dry as he watched the woman place the small object back into her bag. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating. There was an undeniable shift in the energy in the room, like a quiet storm was brewing right under his nose, and he couldn't see it. The couple didn't move. The man, whose piercing gaze had seemed to pierce right through him just moments ago, was now studying Sam, calculating his every move. The woman, who had barely spoken a word, stood poised and calm, as though she was waiting for something. Waiting for Sam. "Are you going to ask, or just keep staring?" The man's voice was cold, almost mocking. Sam swallowed hard. It wasn't just the man's tone that unsettled him, it was the underlying threat in it. As if the question wasn't just about asking for information, it was a test. A test Sam wasn't sure he was ready to take. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Who were they? Why were they acting so confident, so out of place? The feeling of familiarity that had settled in the back of his mind earlier was now a knot in his stomach, pulling at him, urging him to get to the bottom of this. But he couldn't. The words wouldn't come. His voice felt stuck in his throat. The man leaned back, adjusting his leather jacket, the creaking sound of the material echoing through the diner. The woman remained silent. Her eyes trained on him, the corners of her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was like a puzzle, one that Sam couldn't quite fit together. "What do you want from me?" Sam finally forced out, his voice thick with uncertainty. His usual confidence had all but disappeared, replaced by a nervous tension that had begun to claw at him. The woman's eyes flickered momentarily, just a flash, but Sam noticed it. A hint of something almost amused. Then, without warning, she spoke. "You're right to be confused. But that's not the real question, is it?" Sam frowned, his mind scrambling for answers. "What are you talking about?" His voice cracked just slightly, betraying his growing unease. The man finally broke his silence, leaning forward slightly. "What we want, Sam, is for you to stop acting like you don't know us." Sam's pulse quickened. How did they know his name? His stomach dropped. The realization hit him like a freight train. His first instinct was to deny it, to pretend he had no idea who they were, but deep down, something was telling him that the truth would only make things worse. They already knew too much. And the fact that they had come here, to his restaurant, meant something far more significant than he could grasp. Sam's mind raced back over the past few minutes. The way they had walked in without a word. The woman's cryptic comment. The man's unnerving calmness. He had missed something important, something obvious, and it was staring him right in the face. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," Sam stammered, the words slipping out almost involuntarily. His heart was pounding now, his hands clammy with sweat. He was desperately trying to cling to his usual level-headedness, but these people weren't just any random diners, they were something more. "You don't get it, do you?" The man's voice dropped, the low timbre sending a shiver down Sam's spine. He leaned in closer, his breath just barely audible. "We know who you are, Sam. And we've been watching you for a long time." Sam's legs felt weak. His mind was spinning. What did they mean by that? Had they been following him? Had they planned this encounter? He was stuck in a tangled web of uncertainty, and he couldn't see a way out. The woman's hand reached down into her purse again. Sam's eyes followed her every movement, his heart racing. What was she going to do next? Instead of pulling out another object, she placed something on the table. It was a small, folded piece of paper, no bigger than a business card. The weight of it seemed to amplify the silence in the room. She slid the paper toward Sam with a delicate, almost practiced movement. The man didn't move. He simply watched, his dark eyes unblinking. Sam glanced at the paper. It wasn't the paper that caught his attention, it was the way it was placed in front of him. So deliberately, so methodically. Like it had been prepared for this moment. His pulse quickened as he reached for it, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper. He unfolded it slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the paper itself might be a trap. But when he saw what was written on it, his breath hitched in his throat. A single name. Elias Kane. The name was familiar, but Sam couldn't place it immediately. It had been years since he had heard it, but it had always stuck with him. Elias Kane. A name from his past. A name tied to something he never spoke about. Something he tried to bury. He stared at the paper for a moment, the words glaring back at him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The man's lips curved into a slight smile. "That name means something to you, doesn't it?" Sam's head swam. Elias Kane. He had been a part of Sam's life, but he was also a part of a dark chapter, a chapter Sam hadn't wanted to revisit. He had buried that name, buried the memories, deep down, and now it was surfacing again. Suddenly, Sam's mind was a blur of images, flashes of long-forgotten faces, places, and events. But all of them circled back to Elias Kane. A man Sam had once known, a man who had left behind more than just memories. He had left a trail of devastation, one Sam had tried to outrun for years. "What do you want from me?" Sam asked again, his voice shaky now. The reality of the situation was sinking in. He wasn't just dealing with ordinary customers. These people weren't here by accident. They were connected to his past, a past he had thought he had outrun. The woman spoke this time, her voice soft but laced with meaning. "We're here to remind you that the past never stays buried for long." Sam's stomach twisted in knots. He felt like the walls were closing in around him. There was no getting out of this. The truth was coming, whether he was ready for it or not. And Sam was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. Sam's mind was racing. He felt trapped. The words on the paper, Elias Kane, had completely thrown him off balance. It was as if the past he had tried so desperately to forget had risen from the depths, clawing its way to the surface. The man and woman sat there, waiting. Their silence was heavier than any conversation could ever be. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he placed the piece of paper back onto the table. "You don't need to say anything just yet, Sam." The man's voice was low and patient, almost eerily calm. "We know you have a lot of questions. But there's something you need to understand first." Sam was about to ask again, about Elias, about what they knew, but he couldn't form the words. The lump in his throat was growing by the second. He had to calm himself, think. There had to be some way out of this. Some explanation that made sense. The woman leaned forward slightly. "You never thought the past would catch up to you, did you?" Her voice was a whisper, but it felt like a sharp truth slicing through him. "You've been running for a long time, Sam. But there's no place left to hide." The words hit Sam like a punch in the stomach. She was right. He had spent years running, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Elias Kane was a name he had long wished to forget. A shadow that haunted him in ways he couldn't explain. And now, just as he was starting to build a life for himself, that shadow had returned. "Why me?" Sam managed to croak. His voice didn't sound like his own, thick and heavy with the weight of his own past. "Why now?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She simply studied him, her eyes dark and knowing. It was as if she could see through him, peeling away every layer of his guarded exterior. Sam's anxiety was building, and with it, his anger. "I'm not a part of this anymore," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I walked away. I left everything behind." The man smiled again, but it wasn't a warm smile, it was more of a knowing, almost pitying smile. "You really think you can just walk away from what happened?" Sam's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to scream at them, to throw them out of his restaurant, but something inside him knew that wasn't the answer. They had something he needed to understand, something that might explain why they were here. If only he could gather the courage to ask. "Who are you?" Sam finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The woman looked at the man, and they shared a glance that was almost imperceptible. It was enough to make Sam's heart race, knowing there was something he hadn't yet grasped, something hidden beneath the surface. The man took a deep breath before speaking. "We've been looking for you for a long time, Sam." Sam felt a chill run down his spine. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. His restaurant, his sanctuary, suddenly felt like a prison. "I don't want anything from you," the man continued, his tone growing more serious. "But you owe us. You owe me." The word stung, and Sam felt his heart skip a beat. "I owe you?" He was almost too stunned to respond. "How? Why?" The man leaned forward again, his eyes narrowing. You owe me because you walked away when you knew I needed you most. Sam's pulse quickened. He racked his brain, trying to make the connection, but the name Elias Kane echoed in his mind. He knew this man. He had known him. And there was a terrible weight to the realization that this person had played a pivotal role in his life, a role Sam had desperately tried to forget. I don't understand, Sam stammered. What do you want from me? You're telling me that you've been looking for me, but why? I left. You don't need anything from me. The man's expression remained unchanged. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even frustrated. There was only a deep disappointment in his gaze. He seemed to be speaking to Sam like someone explaining a simple truth that Sam had somehow failed to grasp. You know what I want, Sam. It's not what you think. The woman's voice interrupted. It's about Elias. The mention of Elias sent a fresh wave of panic crashing through Sam. His hands clenched into fists, but it didn't help to steady his trembling. Elias Kane was the reason Sam had left his old life behind. The reason for everything. What about him? Sam barely managed to whisper. The man leaned in closer. Elias is dead. Sam froze. His mind didn't know how to process the words. Elias, dead? It felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice-cold water over him. But it's not over. The man's voice was cold, final. Elias' death was only the beginning. And now you're a part of it, whether you like it or not. The words hung in the air, as heavy as the silence that followed. Sam couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His thoughts were racing in all directions. Elias dead? How? Why? The woman reached into her bag again, pulling out a thin, weathered folder. She opened it slowly, the creaking sound of the paper filling the air. She slid a photograph across the table. It was an image of Elias Kane, older than Sam remembered, but unmistakable. The same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes. The photograph was of Elias, but there was something about it that made Sam's stomach turn. The image was taken at a crime scene. Elias' death was no accident, Sam. The man's voice was heavy with gravity. And you need to know why it happened. Because you're involved. Sam felt his heart hammering in his chest. Involved? The word echoed in his mind like an unbearable weight. How? How could he possibly be involved? The woman's voice, low and unyielding, reached him again. This is your past catching up with you, Sam. You need to decide whether you're going to face it, or run again. The room seemed to close in around him. There was no escape. No place to hide. And that name, Elias Kane, kept swirling in his mind. His whole world was beginning to unravel in front of him. Sam's thoughts were a whirlwind. Elias Kane. Dead. The revelation hit him harder than any punch could. His mind couldn't form a clear picture, only fragments. And with each new piece of the puzzle, the fear grew deeper, more suffocating. The woman slid the photograph back into the folder and closed it slowly, the finality of the action making Sam's chest tighten. He felt cornered, not just physically in the restaurant, but emotionally. Everything he had tried to bury for years was rising to the surface. Sam's eyes flicked between the man and woman, both silent, their expressions unreadable. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The weight of their gaze was too much, like they could see every weakness, every moment of hesitation. The man broke the silence first, his voice calm but filled with purpose. We need you to remember, Sam. Sam shook his head, the words sinking deeper into him like stones in water. I told you, I left it all behind. It doesn't work that way. The man's words were firm, almost like a warning. The past always catches up. The truth always comes out. Sam ran a hand over his face. He was exhausted, physically, emotionally. His mind was trying to process the impossible. He had been so sure that by severing ties, by walking away from his old life, he could escape the memories, the guilt. But it seemed like fate had other plans. The woman leaned forward, her eyes piercing into him. You think Elias' death was just an accident, don't you? You think he was just some casualty of a bad deal? Sam's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Elias was no victim. She paused, letting the words settle. He was killed because of something he knew, something he uncovered, and that something has everything to do with you. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. The woman's words were like sharp knives cutting through his memories. Elias was killed because of something he knew? What could that possibly mean? And you're involved because, the man's voice dropped to a near whisper, because you were the one who found it first. The sentence hung in the air like an accusation, a heavy burden that Sam didn't know how to carry. His mind spun. He had no idea what they were talking about. He couldn't remember being involved in anything that would justify Elias' death, or any dark secret. But there were flashes. Images, faint memories that came and went. A meeting in the dead of night. A coded message. A threat. He had been so young back then. Just a kid trying to survive in a world he didn't understand. But now it was all coming back. The man continued, his voice steady but serious. You were involved with something dangerous, Sam. A secret that could change everything. Elias got too close to the truth, and it cost him his life. The man's eyes burned with intensity, as if he was urging Sam to piece the fragments together. But Sam was still lost, still grasping at shadows. I don't know what you're talking about. Sam's voice trembled, but he couldn't stop himself from saying it. I don't know anything. The woman's eyes softened for a split second, almost as if she were pitying him. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a cold resolve. You need to remember, Sam. You need to face what you did, because someone out there is still looking for that truth. Sam felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The room seemed to close in on him as their words sank deeper. Someone is still looking for that truth. That was the part that terrified him the most. Who was it? Why were they still searching for something that had been buried so long ago? The woman's voice broke through his racing thoughts. Elias was on the verge of exposing something, something big. Sam's heart pounded as he grasped for a connection, but it was all too hazy. What was it? What did Elias know? The man looked at the woman for a moment before turning his gaze back to Sam. It's not just what Elias knew, it's what he uncovered. Sam's pulse quickened. What does that mean? His voice was barely a whisper now, barely able to keep up with the flood of questions in his mind. The woman's lips parted, but just before she could speak, the door to the restaurant creaked open. Sam froze, his heart leaping into his throat. The familiar chime of the doorbell echoed in the empty room, followed by the sound of footsteps. The man and woman didn't react. They didn't even flinch, as if they had been expecting someone. But Sam, in his panic, couldn't help but glance toward the door. A man in a dark coat stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. His presence was commanding, and Sam immediately felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He didn't recognize this man, but the way he moved, the way he looked at the woman and man, there was a familiarity there that Sam didn't like. The newcomer didn't speak at first. He just stood there, sizing up the situation. Finally, he took a slow step forward and, in a voice that dripped with cold authority, he spoke. It's time to end this, Sam. The words hit Sam like a brick wall. He felt his blood run cold, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. This man knew him. Knew about Elias. And now, it seemed, he was here to finish what Elias had started. The room seemed to close in tighter. Sam's body froze, his mind spiraling. He had been trying to outrun his past, but the truth was that his past was standing right in front of him, ready to destroy everything he had fought for. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. The man who had entered the restaurant was no stranger. Sam could feel it in his bones, but he couldn't place him. His face was vaguely familiar, like a forgotten dream. His sharp eyes, his calculated posture, the aura of control, everything about him screamed danger. Sam wanted to step back, to run, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The man took a slow, deliberate step forward, never breaking eye contact. The woman and the man who had been questioning Sam didn't seem startled by his entrance. In fact, they both appeared to be waiting for him, as though they knew exactly who he was and what he would do next. "You're wasting your time, Jack." The man with the dark coat spoke in a voice that was too calm for what was about to unfold. His words were directed at the newcomer. Jack. The name hit Sam like a lightning bolt, but it didn't bring any clarity. He'd heard the name before, perhaps a whisper in the background, a mention of a man who controlled things from the shadows. But who was he really? Jack didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked between Sam and the two others, his expression unreadable. Then, as though deciding something, he took off his coat, draped it over a nearby chair, and pulled up a seat, sitting directly across from Sam. "We need to talk, Sam." His voice was cold but firm, like a man used to being listened to, not questioned. Sam clenched his fists, the sweat on his palms making his grip slick. The last thing he wanted to do was talk to this man. Every inch of his body screamed to bolt, but where could he go? And what good would running do when everything he was trying to escape had come knocking at his door? "I don't know who you are," Sam said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But I don't have anything to say to you." Jack's lips curled into a small, almost mocking smile. "You don't remember me? That's a shame." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded, old photograph. He slid it across the table toward Sam. Sam stared at it for a moment, hesitant to touch it. The photo was a grainy black and white image of a man he didn't recognize, at least not immediately. The man was sitting in a small, dimly lit office, papers scattered around him, a desk lamp casting long shadows across his face. But what struck Sam was not just the man in the picture. It was the name scribbled in the corner. Elias Kane, Sam whispered under his breath. The memories hit him with the force of a freight train. Elias. He had been there, in that room, the one Sam had thought he'd erased from his life. The same Elias who had been in the restaurant, asking too many questions, poking too many holes in a life that Sam had worked hard to bury. He was part of it. Part of the mess. The woman sitting next to Sam spoke up, her voice calm but urgent. "This is the last photo of Elias before he died." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. "We found this in his possession right before everything went dark." Sam's breathing hitched. His mouth went dry, and the room suddenly felt too small, too claustrophobic. Everything was connected. Jack's voice broke the silence. "You still don't get it, do you, Sam?" He leaned in, his eyes never leaving Sam's. "Elias was onto something much bigger than you realized. Something that goes back years. Something you didn't know was waiting for you." Sam's pulse quickened. What could Elias have found? What could he possibly know that Sam didn't? The woman beside Sam didn't wait for him to ask the question he was desperate to know the answer to. She answered anyway. Elias was about to expose the truth about the old files. About the organization you were once a part of. The words hit Sam like a bomb. The organization. He felt a wave of nausea hit him. He had always thought of that chapter of his life as a dark, distant past. The things he had done, the people he had crossed paths with, it had been a nightmare. And he had walked away, determined to leave it all behind. But the truth was, you never truly escaped the past. It followed you, shadowed you, and if you weren't careful, it would destroy everything you built afterward. What truth? Sam asked, his voice hoarse. He felt like he was on the verge of suffocating, drowning in this flood of revelations. Jack's eyes never wavered. The files Elias had were evidence of a conspiracy that reaches deep into the heart of the city. People with power. People who control everything from the shadows. He leaned closer. And you, Sam, were the key to it all. You were the one who found the evidence first. Sam recoiled. His mind spun, trying to piece together what they were telling him. The weight of it all pressed down on him. You were working for them, Sam. You just didn't know it. Jack's words were like ice being poured down his spine. That's why Elias was killed. He was getting too close to exposing everything. The woman added, and now, someone is coming after you. They'll do whatever it takes to make sure you don't remember. Sam didn't know whether to feel angry, terrified, or numb. The truth was right there in front of him, but it didn't make sense. He shook his head. I didn't sign up for any of this. I was just trying to survive. Jack's gaze softened, but only for a moment. You weren't just trying to survive, Sam. You were part of a much larger game. A game you didn't even know you were playing. The woman spoke again, her tone even more insistent. We need you to help us, Sam. You're the only one who can put the pieces together. A long silence stretched between them. Sam was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, confusion. He couldn't make sense of it. And yet, one thing was crystal clear, Elias' death wasn't an accident. It was just the beginning of something much larger. Something he was tangled in whether he liked it or not. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air. Sam looked at Jack and then at the woman. They were both waiting for him to make a choice. He had a sinking feeling that once he made that choice, there would be no turning back. And with that thought, Sam understood, this wasn't just about Elias anymore. This was about his own survival. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Sam's mind was in overdrive, processing everything Jack and the woman had just revealed. A conspiracy. The files. Elias' death. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. His thoughts were racing, and yet, there was a strange calmness settling over him. He was at a crossroads. Jack's voice broke through the storm of thoughts in his head. You have to decide, Sam. Sam's eyes snapped to Jack's. His words weren't a suggestion. They were a command. And Sam knew that if he didn't make the right choice, the consequences would be dire. What's the choice? Sam managed to rasp. His throat felt dry, like the words themselves were dragging through a desert. The woman beside him leaned forward. You either help us expose this, or you disappear. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. Sam's heart thudded loudly in his chest as his thoughts spiraled. Expose it? What exactly was he supposed to expose? His mind went back to the files Elias had been looking into. Was it possible that they had all the evidence they needed to bring down the shadowy figures controlling everything? But Sam knew that coming forward with something like that wasn't as simple as spilling the truth. People would get hurt. People would die. Disappear? Sam echoed, his mind locking on that word. What do you mean by disappear? Jack's gaze turned hard. You've been marked, Sam. The people behind all of this know who you are, and they will stop at nothing to make sure you're erased from the picture. His voice was filled with a deadly certainty. If you run, you'll just be a fugitive for the rest of your life, looking over your shoulder, knowing they'll find you eventually. The woman's face softened slightly as she continued, but if you help us, if you're willing to face the truth, we can help you. We can protect you. But you have to understand, the road ahead will be dangerous. People will try to manipulate you, turn you against us. They will try to break you. Sam didn't respond immediately. His mind was still swirling. Help them? But how? His life had been simple for the last few years. He'd been living in the shadows, doing what he had to do to get by. His escape had been his sanctuary. Now, they were asking him to step back into that world he'd worked so hard to leave behind. A world filled with lies, danger, and a threat that was far bigger than he could comprehend. Why me? Sam asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to keep it steady. Why do you think I'm the one who can fix this? Jack's lips curled into a grim smile. Because you're the only one left who knows the truth, Sam. Elias might have had the files, but you were the one who was at the heart of everything. You were the one who made the discoveries, who saw the connections. You were there when it all began. Jack leaned back in his chair, his voice growing colder. You're the key to exposing them. Sam felt a shiver run down his spine. The key? To what? To who? Everything was beginning to feel like a trap, a dangerous game being played with his life as the pawn. A sudden thought struck him, cutting through the fog of confusion. What about the couple? Sam asked, glancing at the two people who had been so involved in this whole mess. Are they with you? The woman answered, her voice steady. Yes, we're part of a network, people who are trying to take down the ones in control. We have resources, connections. We can protect you, Sam. But you have to trust us. The man beside her gave a slight nod. Trust us, Sam. This isn't just about revenge or exposing corruption. This is about survival. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Sam. The people behind this are powerful. They'll do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Sam's mind was a storm of emotions, fear, anger, confusion. He had never asked for any of this. He had never wanted to be part of some grand conspiracy. All he wanted was to live a quiet life, to escape the past that haunted him. But the past had a way of finding its way back, didn't it? Jack stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Sam. Time's running out. You've seen what's at stake. You've felt the weight of the truth. The longer you wait, the more dangerous it gets for everyone involved. His voice softened just slightly. You're not alone in this. We can help you, Sam. But you need to choose. The silence in the room stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Sam's heart raced as he stared at the faces before him. Was this really happening? Was he really about to make a choice that would change everything? Finally, Sam spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. I'll help you. The words were out before he could fully comprehend them. But even as they left his lips, he knew it was the only choice he could make. The truth couldn't stay buried anymore. Not after everything he had learned, not after everything that had been revealed. Jack nodded, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Sam couldn't quite place. Good. The woman spoke next, her voice calm but firm. We need to move quickly. There's no time to waste. The people we're up against are already making their move. We have to act before they do. Sam swallowed hard. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure, this was no longer about him. This was about something much bigger. Something that had the potential to bring down a whole network of power. And Sam was now at the center of it all. The weight of what he had agreed to pressed down on him, but there was no turning back. He had made his choice. And now, the real battle was just beginning. The night felt oppressive as Sam and the others made their way through the narrow alleyways of the city. The streets were empty, the silence broken only by the occasional echo of distant footsteps or the hum of a passing car. The cold seemed to seep into Sam's bones, but it wasn't the chill of the night that had him on edge. It was the overwhelming sense that they were being watched. His thoughts kept racing back to the decision he had made earlier that evening. There's no turning back now. Sam repeated those words in his mind as if trying to convince himself that he hadn't made a mistake. But the truth gnawed at him, the uncertainty of what lay ahead clawing at the edges of his consciousness. Jack led the group with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a practiced wariness. The woman, whom Sam still hadn't learned the name of, walked beside him, her face unreadable, her movements swift and calculated. The man who had spoken earlier kept his distance, always staying a few steps behind, his eyes darting around like a predator hunting for any sign of danger. Sam's instincts screamed that they were walking into a trap, but what choice did he have? They were too far in now. If what Jack and the others had said was true, the people who had been behind Elias' death weren't just dangerous, they were unstoppable. There was no hiding from them. No escaping. Sam had a feeling they were about to see just how far those people were willing to go to keep their secrets safe. "We're almost there, Sam." Jack's voice cut through the heavy silence, bringing Sam back to the present. He looked over at Jack, who was now glancing at him with a serious expression. "When we get inside, we need you to stay close. No heroics, no distractions. This isn't some kind of game." Sam nodded. No heroics. The words felt like a warning, and a part of him understood why. If they were about to confront the people behind Elias' death, they were stepping into the heart of something much darker than Sam had ever imagined. The group reached an old, seemingly abandoned building, the windows boarded up and the door almost hidden by overgrown ivy. Jack knocked in a rhythm, 3 short taps followed by a long one. The door creaked open a moment later, revealing a dimly lit interior. "This way." The man who had stayed behind motioned them inside. Sam hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing against him. It wasn't just the physical darkness of the place that bothered him. It was the sense of danger that seemed to emanate from the walls, from the air itself. This wasn't a safe house. This was something much more dangerous. The door slammed shut behind them, and the woman at the front of the group pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. "Stay quiet." The woman's voice was low, almost a whisper. She led them down a narrow corridor, past rooms that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Dusty furniture covered with white sheets. Empty, silent spaces. At the end of the hall, they reached a heavy metal door. Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled out a keycard, swiped it across a scanner, and the door clicked open. Inside, the atmosphere changed completely. It was as though they had crossed into another world. The walls were lined with high-tech equipment, monitors, computers, cables, and gadgets that Sam couldn't even begin to understand. In the center of the room was a large table covered with maps, files, and what looked like dossiers of various people. The woman gestured to the table. "We've been gathering intel for months." Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it now. "This is the heart of everything. What we know, what we've uncovered, it's all here." Jack walked over to the table and began flipping through the documents, his face hardening as he scanned the information. Sam felt a surge of unease, knowing that whatever was in those files could change everything. He could already feel the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "So, this is it? This is how we stop them?" Sam asked, his voice betraying his disbelief. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face him, his expression intense. "This is only the beginning," he said slowly. "What you don't understand, Sam, is that the people we're up against, they aren't just individuals. They have connections everywhere. In government, in corporations, in the very institutions that are supposed to protect us." Sam's stomach tightened at the implication. They were everywhere. And if Jack was right, it wasn't just a conspiracy. It was an entire network, an invisible web that stretched across every part of society. How could they fight something like that? They know we're here, don't they? Sam asked quietly, already knowing the answer. His mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. If this group had managed to gather this much information, then surely the people they were up against had already figured out who was involved. Jack's eyes narrowed. Yes. And they'll be coming for us soon. We have to move quickly, before they can react. A cold shiver ran down Sam's spine. The sense of danger that had been hanging over them now felt almost tangible. It wasn't just the unknown they had to face. It was the certainty that they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't even see. The woman's voice was calm but urgent. We have a plan. We know where to strike first. She paused, making sure Sam was listening. But we need you to trust us, Sam. This won't be easy. Trust. It all came down to that, didn't it? Sam had trusted Elias, and look where that had gotten him. Facing a world that had suddenly turned upside down. Could he trust these strangers? Could he trust Jack and the woman who had brought him here? Sam looked at them, at the files scattered on the table, and at the dangerous road that stretched out before him. There was no going back. They were already too deep. I'm in. Sam said, his voice steady despite the fear tightening in his chest. Jack gave him a sharp nod. Good. Let's get to work. Just as Jack finished speaking, the sound of something shifting in the distance caught their attention. It was faint, but unmistakable, a door opening somewhere in the building. Sam's heart skipped a beat. They were here. The time for talking was over. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing through the cold, sterile corridors of the building. Sam's pulse quickened, his breath shallow as he instinctively stepped closer to the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. The room had grown tense, the air thick with an ominous energy. The plan, everything they had worked for, was at risk. Get down. The woman's voice was a sharp command, and before Sam could react, Jack had already moved, ducking behind a large filing cabinet. The man, who had been silent for most of the night, followed quickly, his movements swift but cautious. Sam froze for a moment, panic rising. Were they really here? Was it time already? Stay low and stay quiet. Jack hissed, his eyes flashing with urgency as he looked at Sam. We can't afford to be caught now. Without thinking, Sam dropped to the ground, his body curling into the shadow of the cabinet. The silence was unbearable, every sound amplified, the quiet hum of the building, the shuffle of feet moving just outside the room, the muffled voices growing nearer. Then, the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, tall and cloaked in shadow, their face hidden beneath a hood. Sam's heart hammered in his chest as the figure paused, scanning the room with what felt like a chilling awareness. Sam dared not breathe, his body tense as the figure moved closer, almost as if they could sense his presence. Another figure entered the room, a second person. Then another. They were surrounding them. Sam's mind raced. Who were they? What did they want? Everything's in place, sir. The voice of the first figure broke through the tension. It was calm, too calm, like they were certain of their success. Good. The second figure spoke, his voice deep and calculating. The network will be fully operational within hours. We'll have control of everything. Sam felt his stomach drop. They were moving forward with their plan. What plan? Sam didn't have time to dwell on it. His focus snapped back to the figures in the room. And the others, the second figure continued, speaking with cold precision. We've taken care of them. The voice was laced with satisfaction. They won't be a problem anymore. Sam's thoughts reeled. The others. Were they talking about the people who had been helping him? Had they already been silenced? A cold sweat broke out on his brow. The reality of their situation began to sink in. These were not just ordinary people they were dealing with. This was a powerful, organized group. People who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. The second figure spoke again, his tone harsh. Get rid of the evidence. Burn everything. We can't afford any loose ends. Understood. The first figure responded quickly, and Sam could hear the sound of footsteps moving toward the table, shuffling papers, perhaps collecting files. For a moment, the tension held. Sam was trapped in the silence, the sound of his own heart beating in his ears. But then, something unexpected happened. Wait. A new voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the heavy atmosphere. Sam's heart skipped a beat as the door opened wider. Another figure stepped into the room, this one wearing a suit, clean-cut, and bearing an air of authority. There was a cold, unsettling calm about him. He was different from the others, but there was something about him that made Sam's blood run cold. We need to talk about the situation with the boy. The man's voice was low but forceful. The boy? Sam felt a chill grip his spine. Were they talking about him? The first figure spoke again, but his voice was more guarded. He's not a threat. We've dealt with him. No, the man's voice turned sharp. You don't understand. This one, he's different. We can't just brush him aside. There was a pause, the tension in the room thickening. Sam tried to make himself smaller, but he could barely breathe now. The man's words rang in his mind, spinning around him like a cruel echo. Different? What did that mean? What are you saying? The second figure asked, his voice now tinged with frustration. He's nothing. Just a distraction. The man in the suit took a step forward, his shoes clicking sharply against the concrete floor. It's not that simple. His gaze swept across the room, cold and calculating. He's been connected to Elias. And Elias was no ordinary man. He had information, things we've been trying to keep hidden. Sam felt his stomach drop. Elias' name hung in the air, and Sam felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Elias had known something. He had uncovered something they didn't want out in the open. What do you want us to do? The first figure asked, voice uncertain. The man's eyes narrowed. Keep him alive. For now. The words hit Sam like a slap. Alive? They were going to keep him alive? What were they planning to do with him? Was this part of their larger plan? Or did they see him as a threat, someone who might expose them? Understood. The second figure said. Sam could hear the shuffle of papers, the scraping of a chair. Then the sound of the door closing as the figures exited the room, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. For several long moments, Sam sat there in stunned silence. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the conversation he had just overheard. They were watching him. They had plans for him. But why? Finally, Jack moved from his hiding place. We need to leave. Now. Sam blinked, confused. What happened? What was all that about? We've been exposed. They know about you, Sam. Jack's voice was grim, but there was an edge of urgency to it. And they're not going to let you go. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. What do you mean they won't let me go? What are they going to do to me? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the woman, who had remained quiet throughout the exchange. She nodded sharply, her face stoic. We need to move. They'll be coming for you soon, Sam. If we don't act fast, you'll be in even more danger than you are now. Without another word, Jack motioned for Sam to follow him. The sound of footsteps behind them was a constant reminder of the threat they now faced. The room they had been in was no longer safe. The entire building felt compromised. As they exited the room, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that their real fight was only just beginning. The people they were up against were far more dangerous than they had anticipated. And now, with his life hanging by a thread, Sam had to decide, would he fight back? Or would he become the next victim in their plan? The first steps of survival had begun. The question now was whether they would be enough to save him. The night air outside was cold and biting, the kind of chill that seemed to seep into the bones. Sam's breath formed little clouds as he hurried through the darkened alley, Jack and the woman not far behind him. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few days, everything he'd learned about Elias, the mysterious group chasing him, and the terrifying realization that his life was no longer his own. Jack stopped abruptly, pulling Sam to a halt as the woman moved forward, her eyes scanning the street. She was always the first to react, always alert, but Sam could see the tension in her body now more than ever. They knew they were being hunted. "What's the plan?" Sam asked, his voice a mix of desperation and exhaustion. He was worn out, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But there was no time to rest. The danger was still real, still closing in. "We get to the safe house." Jack's voice was flat, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Sam that the stakes had just been raised. What could be worse than this? "Safe house?" Sam repeated, his voice incredulous. "Where?" "We're being hunted by, it's the only place left that's secure." Jack cut him off, his tone sharper now. "We don't have time to debate this. If we don't get there, we're all dead. The moment we stop running is the moment they find us." Sam glanced over his shoulder, but the streets were empty, still, like a forgotten corner of the world. How long would they be safe here? He didn't know. He couldn't trust anything anymore, not his own instincts, and certainly not the people who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Jack had said they were exposed, but Sam had yet to fully understand just how deep the rabbit hole went. As they continued their walk through the deserted streets, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The last few days had been filled with too many secrets, too many lies, and now, the very people who had been helping him seemed almost distant. They arrived at the safe house, a rundown, seemingly abandoned building hidden in plain sight. The outside was unremarkable, just another decaying structure among a row of similar ones. The paint on the walls was chipped, and the windows were dark. But inside, it was a different story. Sam entered cautiously, taking in the sparse, utilitarian setup. A few chairs, a desk, some old files strewn across the floor. Nothing about it suggested the comfort of safety, only survival. And Sam realized then, with a sickening sense of clarity, that this wasn't about comfort anymore. It had never been about comfort. It was about survival. "We need to talk." The woman's voice broke the silence, and Sam looked up to see her standing in front of a wooden door at the back of the room, looking over her shoulder at him. There was something in her gaze, something guarded. Jack stepped forward, his face a mask of frustration. "Not now. We need to secure the place first, but the woman didn't back down. "No. We need to talk now." Sam looked between them, sensing the tension between them. What were they hiding? "What's going on?" Sam asked, his voice suddenly more forceful. "Why is everyone acting so weird? You're not telling me something. What's really going on here?" The woman stepped forward, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "You deserve to know. You have a right to know." Jack seemed to tense at that, but Sam pressed on. "What? What's the truth?" The woman's eyes flickered briefly toward Jack before turning back to Sam. "You were never supposed to get involved in this." She said it slowly, as though weighing each word. "None of this was meant for you." Sam's head spun. "What do you mean?" "I was just helping. I didn't ask for this." You were helping because of Elias. She cut him off. Elias was the one who made the connection. He knew something big. And you were a part of it, even though you didn't know. Sam stared at her, unable to comprehend. What connection? What did Elias know? The woman's face tightened as she lowered her voice. Elias knew about the network. She stepped closer, her words becoming more urgent. He knew what it could do, and he had a plan to stop it. The people we're running from, they're a part of something much larger than we realized. The network's not just about surveillance or power, it's about control over everything, every piece of data, every piece of information. Sam felt a chill crawl up his spine. What kind of control? The kind that turns everything you know into a lie. She looked at him then, her expression almost pitying. Elias wanted to bring it all down. But it was too late. They knew about him. They knew about all of us. And now, they're after you because you're the last link in their chain. Sam took a step back. What do you mean, the last link? The woman paused, eyes darkening. You're the key to exposing them. You're the one who holds the final piece to the puzzle. The moment Elias connected you to the network, you became their target. They can't afford for you to live, ***. Jack's face was hard as stone as he stepped between them. It's true, Sam. That's why we've been running. You're the one they need to silence. The room seemed to close in around him, the weight of the revelation nearly suffocating. What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do? The woman shook her head. We're not asking you to do anything. But we're offering you a choice. She paused, letting her words sink in. You can run, disappear. Live your life, but always looking over your shoulder. Or you can fight. You can help us bring this network down. Sam's mind spun, his thoughts flashing between the two options she laid before him. Run. Fight. Neither seemed like an easy choice, and neither promised safety. The group chasing him had resources, power, and people on the inside. He was a target, and he had no illusions about what they'd do to him if they found him. But then, there was something else, a burning sense of justice deep inside him. What they were doing was wrong. If he could stop it, if he could expose them, maybe, just maybe, he could stop the cycle of control they had created. He turned to face the woman, his decision forming. I'm in. I'll fight. Her eyes widened, but there was no time to say anything more. A sudden crash from the front of the house startled them, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps approached. They found us, Jack said, his voice grim. Sam took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. There was no turning back now.